Selamat siang Bapak dan Ibu yang terhormat. Hope I got that right. I know it's right after lunch. It could be really challenging, but there's some great content lined up for the rest of the day to keep you all excited. But this session, I'm going to talk all about data. So first up, I want to welcome you all again, and thanks for taking the time today. So data is everywhere. There's no limit to the amount of data that's available today. For most companies, your customers and data against your customers are your biggest assets. So how are we making use of this data today? We kind of use data in our day-to-day lives, right? Let me take a simple example. Clocks, watches, right? Watches were always meant to tell you the time of the day. What do we have today? The amount of data that we have on offer from these watches today are staggering, right? Is it a problem? I guess so. I think it's a good problem to have because as long as they're making us smarter, it's always a good problem to have. But how about in our industry? Well, I'm pretty sure most of you have seen the Lumascape. So that's kind of the evolution of the MarTech landscape in the last 7 years. Well, in our industry, we always talk about consolidation that's happening in the last few years. And as you can see, while that's happening on one side, it's pretty much the landscape is kind of grown 40x from 2011 to 17. There's like 5,000 over players today. Looks complicated? Yes, it's way too complicated, it's cluttered, it's hard to find like anyone within that landscape. And that's the industry that we're working today. So most companies like you all today, are struggling with way too much of information and like very little ways to actually make sense of that data. Sounds like a big problem to me. It's already complicated. So what do we need then? How do we tackle this problem? Is it big data? I think that's what we were looking at the landscape. There's way too many players, there's way too many big data platforms, but that's not what we need. What we actually need is quality and actionable data to drive business value for your businesses, your day-to-day lives. Well, big data seem to have they claim to have solved some of these woes in the recent years, but in reality, it's just made things complicated day in and day out. So, a little bit about me. So I'm Nishanth, people call me Nish. I work for Lotame, as I oversee the client success for Lotame in the region. I'll talk a bit about what is client success later, but for those that haven't heard about Lotame is a data management platform. So the largest independent data solutions company in the globe. We work with publishers like you all, marketers like you all, and agencies as well, if someone's there from agencies over here. We help drive data strategy. But me personally, I've got a huge passion for data and technology, and hence the reason I'm standing right in front of you and talking about data. It could sound boring for a few people, but that's something that I love doing day in and day out, and I guess to most people over here as well. Right? So I've worn many different hats in the last few years. But for me personally, my experience around data and technology and driving value for businesses like you all, from helping from a data strategy and helping you achieve the business goals, is meant the most to me of all my experiences. So I touched a bit upon quality data. So what is quality data? What is actionable data? Where do we get it? It's all around the place. Quality data is a bit like digging a gold mine, right? So it's like digging gold from a gold mine. For those of you that have seen this picture before, are familiar with this picture, apparently it's a gold mine in Indonesia, which I was not aware of until I Googled for this one. Pretty impressive. But moving on to data. You know the data is hidden somewhere, not like any random data, it's the actionable data that we're talking about over here. But what do we need to get to that data? It kind of requires A bit of digging and sweating. Well, it sounds a bit complicated process to me. I'm pretty sure like everyone's facing that day in and day out in your businesses today. So what do I really mean by digging and sweating over here? I think the natural thought process is, oh, let's go get a good technology, a tool that helps us dig the gold mine and get the gold out of it quicker. But in theory, in reality, it's not the case. It's not that easy. You don't just take a pickaxe to go and dig a gold mine and get a gold, right? You need a process. You need to define your objectives, and you got to get your strategy right? That's the most important piece for anything and everything. Any initiative, there's got to be a strategy, but with data, you got to have a specific data strategy that's geared towards your business objectives. So what do I mean by data strategy? Let's jump in a bit deep into data strategy, right? First up, the most important piece is define your objectives. Like any strategy, it starts with defining your objectives, knowing what your goals are, and knowing what your KPIs are. And goals could be short-term, it could be long-term. It always needs to be a bit of both, right? You can't just have one long-term goal and just work towards it. You've got to have short-term goals defined, clearly mapped out, and that's what we're talking about. Is that it? I think that's fine. That's a good start. But what's the most important piece over here? Your company culture is kind of driven by your execs. Your execs set the tone for the company culture. So corporate alignment is such a key factor over here. If the top level is not aligned as to what the objectives are and where we're going to get to, it's never going to work. So that's the most important piece. So the execs out here in this room, if you want your teams to be using data day in and day out in their daily lives, you got to make that as a business priority. And vice versa for the teams that are working on as well. Push your execs to do that. What's next? So we heard, I guess it was Suresh from Google, talk about cross-collaboration across departments and how data should be an integrated strategy across departments. That's one of the most important factors. The reason why I say that is it's always easy to take data as a strategy and stick that under a specific department which doesn't talk to anyone else across the organization. We've got to break the silos, right? Traditionally, we've always had silos within the organization, and that needs to be broken. Remember, data is an integrated strategy across your company. So if you don't get your stakeholders aligned, mapped it out, it's never going to be working. Is that it? I think breaking the silos is one thing, but just keeping them away from coming back is the key thing. So think long term over here. But get your stakeholders aligned. That could be teams from your product team, your marketing team, your IT, your ad ops team, your execution team. It could be anyone. Identify the right stakeholders from each of these departments and make that as a priority within each of those business units. Done. What's next? This is key. I'm pretty sure everyone's facing this issue day in and day out. Getting the people aligned, right? You gotta find the right mix of people to actually plan to until execution. Planning is always easy, right? So you can always do the planning, but just taking that plan, working that across n number of business units within the organization and getting that to execution is the most toughest part. So one of the most common challenges that we're facing in our worlds today is the lack of talent in the industry, and especially around technology and data expertise. Right? People that understand data and are able to drive a value around data are very little today, so that's very scarce. Be creative. You all have analysts today in your organization. Move them away from the typical analyst role, which they are kind of report pullers today. In most companies that I've seen, you have a bunch of data analysts and all they do is pull reports from different systems. Is that actionable at all? Not really. To get that, start from there. Now, so your goals are defined, you've broken down the silos, and you've identified a solid team that's actually going to help you plan and execute. What's next? Then jump into the technology piece. Then talk about tools. Now talk about which is the right pickaxe for you. Which is the right tool for you within the organization. Don't just see a tool as a tool that's going to help you implement a solution. Always look at technology as a partnership. Because most of the expertise on the data side or the tech side is going to come from your technology partners. So they're going to help you fill in the gaps within the organization. So it's really critical to start seeing these tools as partnerships over a longer period of time to really help fill in gaps until your teams are up and running internally. So what's next? We've done everything right. You've got the technology in place. You've started implementing, so you're collecting data from n number of different sources, n number of different tools. Is that it? I guess not. That only kind of covers like 30% of it. So what does the rest 70% mean? For me, that's the most important 70%. Getting things right and getting things up to a stage where you know, hey, I've got my data sorted, I've got everything aligned, I've got a great taxonomy, I've got a great bunch of audiences. What do you do with that data? You got to use it. You got to use that data to analyze it and pass that data on to the right decision makers within the organization. If data is not going to help you make a business decision, it doesn't mean anything. It's as good as having a wealth of data within the organization. And none of that data makes any sense for you. It's meaningless, it's worthless without having a solid go-to-market strategy in place. So by that, I mean like look beyond the data. They always say that, look under the bonnet. It's not the obvious ones that are going to actually help you derive some business values. It's always the unknown that helps you derive or push your business forward. Great, so insights is done. So what's next? I've already done my teams, I've already done my execution, I've already got like a bunch of people that are working day in, day out, and I already got the data into the right mix. How quickly can you do this? Is this like a month job, 2-month job? What is it? Data is a long-term strategy. Data is a long-term strategy. Remember that. Data is not a short-term fix for any of this within the organization. It takes a while. But having said that, don't stop there. It's always difficult to get everything aligned across all your departments, all your business objectives. Data doesn't line up that perfectly within a month or 2 or 3. It is a long-term strategy. You're kind of disrupting your company and you're taking it forward by going via the data road. So it's a long-term strategy, but it's really important to have shorter goals in place. Measure time to value, right? Talk about a single department if you have to. If you're talking about marketing, if you're talking about multiple devices, let me just get my web data sorted. Let me just get my mobile data sorted. Let me get my execution sorted at an ad hoc perspective. Let me get my go-to-market strategy from a product perspective started as a phase 2. There's going to be many different short-term goals that keep you running and help you measure success. Because that goes back to my previous point as well, where the rest 70% is all about insights, right? So you can't wait for all of your data to come through and talk about insights, seeing value in data. So you got to phase it out, and that's the most important critical part of data. Well, just to give you a summary before I jump into this one, we spoke a bit about data strategy. Let me quickly summarize. Identify your goals, get your corporate alignment done, ensure you've got your stakeholders buy-in, internal buy-in across the different teams. You know who's going to use, what are they going to be using for, and everything sorted. Then get your teams in place, the technology in place, and then talk about insights. Help drive value out of that data from there. So what value I'm going to drive from my data? So there's plenty of use cases. I've listed only very few over here. It would take a few slides if we had to fill in all the different use cases. These are some of the major ones that we can talk about, and I'm really going to highlight only a couple of them, which kind of leads me into the next conversation, which is the most interesting one, about the consortiums, right? So I'm going to talk about branding, picking one from the marketer side, and then picking another from the publisher side, which being ad sales. So how was branding done in the past? Branding, it was literally running a campaign on a few different major players. I want to be on a certain homepage, on a prime section of a premium publisher, or I'm just going to spray and pray and just hope that's going to make sense. Like the only way to measure that was the number of people that you reached across for that brand campaign. But today, with data, there's plenty of other stuff that can be done, right? So branding doesn't stop there. You could run surveys on targeted users and get them to respond either positively or negatively about your brand and understand what the consumer sentiments are for that particular brand, and you have a much more deeper understanding about your users. How are they engaging with your brand? What are their sentiments across your brand? Are they more likely to actually talk good about your brand outside and spread the good word, right? That's one way of looking at it from a pure branding perspective. Performance is always easy. You already have something to measure against, and with data, it's a lot more easier play over there. All we need is whether we're talking about a higher click-through rate, which is not something that I'm happy talking about most of the time, but if you have a real conversion over there as a brand, it's more easier to actually work towards that way. Hence the reason I'm picking branding over here. But on the flip side, ad sales. So publishers over here, I'm pretty sure you're selling inventory day in and day out. You're going and hitting out your buyers, and how often you have to struggle to ensure that you get your brand out onto the media plan on your buyer side. It's always a bit of struggle because it's a hit or miss, because there was nothing earlier. So a typical ad sales was run of sight or a contextual at some point in time. But today, it's way beyond that, right? So you can run targeted, you can package with data, you can follow the user wherever the user is. Was something that gave you a premium CPM in the past, and rest of the remnant were just yielding you a 10 cents or 20 cents CPM. You were able to actually increase your revenue by following the user wherever the user is. And with programmatic coming into play, it's made a lot more efficient. You're overlaying data, we're talking about PMPs over there, and there's plenty of stuff that can be done from a packaging perspective on the ad sales side. I think that's enough about the use cases. I can talk a lot about these use cases. Feel free to find me. I'll be outside somewhere if you wanted to actually touch upon some of the detailed use cases on data. But with that being said, we talked a lot about innovations, disruptions in the industry, consolidations, a lot of players getting added. But whilst that's happening on one side, on the other side, it's pure domination by a couple of players in this industry, right? And I'm pretty sure you all know who I'm talking about. So the likes of Google and Facebook, right? The walled gardens are getting higher. The amount of data that we can get back as you as consumers or businesses are very limited today, beyond the walled gardens. And it's challenging. When 2/3 of your spends and 2/3 of your digital channels are only Google and Facebook, it's always going to be challenging for you as businesses to do. So what are the initiatives around that side? So let's, without any further ado, let me invite Hari onto the stage to talk a bit about SMX, consortium story, how they set up, how are they combating against the duopoly, and how are they creating an alternate viable marketplace for you as all buyers over here. Thank you.
Thank you, Nishanth. Good
Welcome.
to see you here on stage.
Good to see you too. All right, so I know we've spoken a lot about all of this, but for the benefit of the crowd, tell us a bit about what is SMX, why SMX, why did that come into play, and what's the benefit?
Right. All right, so good afternoon, everybody. I mean, it's an awesome stage. It's an awesome crowd. I can't even see the end of the room. It's totally awesome. So without further ado, to answer your question, so I think, globally, there is a need for publishers, I think. It's my personal view. Publishers to basically come together and create brand-safe environments at scale with great ad formats and great targeting and great data. So there is a need in the market. There has always been a need in the market, both for the buyers. So I come from the buy side. I've spent a lot of time with agencies. I've also spent some time on the client side buying. So we always felt this need for having a viable alternative in the market. The more the merrier, right? It's a party when it's more. When it's a couple of them, it gets boring after a while. So from that perspective, why did SMX come into being? SMX is not the first to come into being. There were a few others. There is this highly successful consortium called CAPEX, Kiwi Premium Exchange. There's another one called Pangea Alliance in the Europe. There's another one called Delta in Japan. And there are a few friendly consortiums out here in Southeast Asia as well. So all these consortia or publishers banding together, you could call them co-ops, coalition, whatever, happened simply because of the fact that there was a dearth of quality inventory being delivered at scale for buyers, and also a question of attribution, question of viewability, question of brand safety. All of this sort of kind of meant that we needed, or let's say the media industry needed, these coalitions in order to address two bands. One is the branding band, the other one is the performance band. Now that is sort of the background based on which SMX was created. Singapore Media Exchange was created as a 50-50 joint venture in Singapore by the two media behemoths, SPH, the only largest print house in Singapore, and MediaCorp, the top broadcaster, the only broadcaster in Singapore. So they decided a couple of years ago, they went to the drawing board, they looked at all the consortia around the world. I'm sure they talked to you as well a lot in between. Lodami has been a great partner in setting this up. And they basically looked at the plus and the minuses of all the consortia and kind of pulled out the essence, the best of all of that, and created a game plan, a blueprint around a year ago. And after that, they kind of set that in motion. Launched in April or May this year, in fact, but the shutters were opened in April. So the cornerstones of this company, or rather, let me take a step back. The cornerstone, one of the big cornerstone of this coalition is the fact that it's not a loose coalition. It's not a few partners just banding together and saying, okay, come, let's go for a journey, let's drink and be merry. No, that's not what it is. It's basically a consortium which is a company. They floated a company called Singapore Media Exchange. It's a 50-50 joint venture. There's money on the table. Without money on the table, there's no skin in the game. So that's when people are invested. That's when there is pride. That's when there is a vision. There's a mission. There's a flag to rally around. And that's when things get really serious. So that kind of answers your question around what is SMX and how kind of SMX was created.
Yep.
We've been 7-8 months in the journey. We are an independent entity. Even the people who work within SMX, the team are independent of the publishers. So there is very clear neutrality involved. And it's just a mission to ensure that we will create, or rather we are in the process of creating a premium, probably the only premium programmatic marketplace in Singapore as a viable alternative. And in Singapore, definitely, you don't need to go and educate the buyers about who SPH and MediaCorp are and how safe they are or how viewable their inventory is, so on and so forth. So that's kind of a, like a very quick story in a nutshell about what SMX is, why it was created, and why such co-ops exist in the world today.
Awesome. So you covered plenty of stuff over there. So two things that was pretty evident was the scale and reach in Singapore between the two big media publishers. I guess you cover like 80%, 85% in the market. Now that answers only 2 of it. The third one that the likes of Google and Facebook have, which is better than most of anyone, is the data against all the users. So how does data play a role in your consortium?
Right, that's an awesome question. So again, I think I'll have to take a step back here. So reach, scale, SMX as consortium, because MediaCorp and SPH, I think before we get to data, I think I also need to sort of explain a little bit about what the construct is, and then only data becomes relevant. So what did we do? We did a few things. We said, okay, we need reach. And then we said, let's pool all the programmatic non-guaranteed inventory into a single platform. Let's ring fence it. And let's also pool all the data that both the sites have. That's like around 40 plus sites into a single platform, a data management platform, which means that we are ring fencing data into a single platform. SMX has the access to the data from both the publishers for activation, and all the programmatic non-guaranteed inventory into a single platform, an SSP, and then the show starts. So that's sort of the thing. So then what happens is, then you get to see what kind of scale and reach you get in the market. So SMX reaches 4 out of 5 people in Singapore. Yeah, I mean, granted it's a small market, but it has to start somewhere, right? I mean, so that's what we are trying to create. So 80% reach in the market, as well as the data that cuts across intent, cuts across interest, behavioral, etc. Again, pull into a single data management platform. So we said we need reach, we need scale, we need first-party data, we need innovation, impactful formats, and lastly, the 5th pillar is we needed a single point of contact in the market, free, for anybody to access, ideally 24/7, although I wouldn't give my mobile numbers to people, but in general 24/7 access to everybody, all the buyers, and being able to, being nimble, agile, and easy for buyers. So those were the 5 pillars that we based it on. Coming back to the data thing, I think this is a big play. I'm sure all the other consortiums like CAPEX and everyone else agrees to the fact that merely pooling a lot of impressions or inventory, people tend to brand it as remnant inventory, and I don't think I really like that term. There is nothing called a remnant inventory. Remnant inventory can go to house ads, maybe, but the real inventory is the unfilled inventory that is probably not being filled because there aren't enough of options in the market, there isn't the right amount of monetization or the model for monetization happening in the market. So that inventory which is unfilled, which is premium, we are talking about home pages here, we are talking about sections here, we are talking about some real curated quality local content coming out there as unfilled inventory. And that when that inventory becomes consolidated into a single platform, and when the first party data gets mapped together from both the publishers, that's 40 sites, then what you get is a very unique situation, a very unique model, a very unique go-to-market product where, for example, I am able to, let's say, pull out a data set on drivers of luxury cars, let's say, and I am able to activate that data across the entire 40 sites. When was that possible in the past? SPHS, on the one hand, they would have probably activated this data set across their sites. They are unable to extend it to any other site. Right? On the MediaCorp side, they didn't have this data to begin with. They didn't have this data at all. So if you're able to take this data out and being able to target them across the network, I think that's real scale and that's real power. If you're able to add a little bit of location also in there for the likes of insurance companies like Direct Asia, if you add some location also in there, it becomes really powerful. Now, so that is the first application of data which has been enabled by Lodemy, where of course the uptake could be a little slow, I must admit, because programmatic is evolving, so the level of understanding across agencies as well as clients kind of varies, depends on industries and business. So therefore, testing the waters is what is happening right now. It's just a matter of time before it achieves scale. But the fact that there is this sort of data available, and the fact that there will be even more richer data that I can layer on top of this data. So imagine if I'm able to bring in, let's say, an e-commerce portal data, e-commerce data into the picture, or if I'm able to bring, let's say a Grab sort of data, right, into the picture. Imagine me layering this data over the first-party data of SPH and MediaCorp. Then it starts getting more and more powerful. It starts becoming like a graph. And if I can somehow bring one magic pill inside called an identifier, some sort of an identifier that can basically stitch all these guys together and then tie it down to one guy, then that becomes the holy grail, right? So that marketing, people-based marketing or ID-based marketing is our goal. I think, I'm sure Nishanth is going to agree with this, that, I think that's their goal. It's a collective goal because at the end of the day, a viable alternative marketplace. I don't know if you remember the old world days of display. There was this tool called Google Ad Planner long ago. I think it was 10 years ago easily. And you had, you could just basically put some filters like geography and a few like interest, for example. And then you could get a list of all the sites in a particular market. You could get the audience reach. You could get the audience composition. And then you could like push out a beautiful graph, three-dimensional graph with bubbles, basically showing the reach, and then the two axes. So that particular graph could easily be taken to any client. For a display plan, you could just take that graph into the client and say, why you should choose these sites, because here you get reach, here you get audience composition frequency. That's why the mix should be there, and you are likely to get this sort of an effective reach in the end if you were to target this sort of impressions. This happened 10 years ago. I have done it myself. Now, where are we today? Somebody got very smart on the other side, and they removed pretty much all the sites over a period of time. Right? It's not free lunch. Somebody said it's not free lunch. So they killed most of the sexy part of the tool. Today we have Google Display Planner, which is probably 10% of what it was in the past. It can't even generate a graph. Yeah, it does generate some graphs, but anyway. So what I'm trying to go there, where I'm trying to go is the fact that we need tools like this, and that can be enabled by data, which means that if you, in Indonesia, if you have all the 5 big publishers coming together, and you're able to create a media planning tool of some sort like this, can you imagine what will happen? It'll be a revolution, right? Now, this is what consortia are about. This is what the vision of consortia should be, and this is what we have in our mind also. It's baby steps. It'll take a while. I'm hoping that Nisha and his team are going to help us reach an ID-based setup for data maybe in the next 12 months, I don't know, but if we get there, I think that's where it is. And it's already happening in the US. It's called the Open Ad ID Consortium, which is Index Exchange, LiveRamp, and AppNexus. They have created this Open Ad ID Consortium whereby they have already tested a campaign. They're waiting for the results as we speak. So they had this people graph, ID-based graph, and they did a test with a client to show the lift based on ID-based marketing versus cookie-based marketing. Correct. And that test has just happened. They're waiting for results. And pretty much sure that it's going to be a success. That needs to come to APAC. That needs to come to Asia. It can come to Asia only if publishers band together.
Right. Well, there's plenty of innovations happening in this area, and Ad ID, Open ID is something that's going to come up soon. With consortiums, it's not just happening over here, right? So there's plenty of consortiums that are run across the globe. Some early adopters, starting in France to US and so on and so forth. There's one that recently happened in UK as well, and you're taking some learnings out of Capex I knew before you started, but some are more successful than the others, and you've been like really successful in the last 6 months. So what have you done right? Like in the last 6 months, what's evolved? And what are buyers expecting from you today? And if someone had to go ahead and do this over here in this region, what would be your message to this group over here?
So what did we do? Okay, like I said already that we consolidated the inventory, we consolidated the data, we created we basically checkmarked all the brand safety, viewability, all of that. But we also did one more thing. We just said that for this to become a really viable alternative marketplace, you got to change the behavior of buyers. So if you're drinking blended whiskey every day, how can I make you drink single malts tomorrow? I mean, it's an upgrade, right? So we said it takes a little bit of forcing. So we said, why don't we just ring fence our inventory for real, which means no buyer can access, or the largest buyers cannot access our inventory anywhere else in the world, in no other platform in the world, except for SMX. So imagine, let's say SPH and MediaCorp's programmatic non-guaranteed inventory being available only in a single platform, and nowhere else. When I say nowhere else, right? So if that happens, then the behavior changes. Now when we go and talk to the buyers, agency, planners, traders, etc., we change the behavior. The game is not only PMP, the game is also open market. It's porting the demand for open market, changing the behavior. If you're going into a bidder and then choosing, you don't have to choose a headaches, but you just start buying. Now they may have to take one more step of choosing another exchange to access this inventory. So it's opening another door. The other door is shut. Open this door, then you get access to the inventory. That's what we did. It's not been done by any other consortium. And in 7 months, I'm still here, I still have a job. So that pretty much should mean that these are things that would work. It needs some level of guts and grit, I suppose, and I'm sure a lot more people will have it, but it's working. That's one of the big things that's happened.
Awesome.
And back to you, Nishanth. So how would you, as Lodomi, how would you kind of help accelerate this kind of spread across the Southeast Asia region? Now, there's one point I would say just before this is the fact that if the same thing, if publishers can come together, form a company and have the trust and the cooperation, the collaboration, the vision, and the want to create an alternative marketplace, you have to take steps like this, which is basically to control, ring-fence the inventory, create an ecosystem that belongs to yourself and nobody else. And that's what is really required. It needs a company. Can't be a contract or a coalition or anything like that, if you ask me. So back to you.
Wow, that was going to be my last question to you. You put it back to me. That was fun. So, Lodomi, as a partner with yourself and most of the publishers that we work with in the region, we're already doing this, right? So we already talk to all these publishers, all these buyers, trying to connect all these dots, hoping that at some day we're going to have that consolidated consortium or alternate marketplace where buyers could go and see value. And for publishers, it's giving you back the revenue. We're kind of running out of time, so we want to cut it short and just end with this. But I want to say that publishers do deserve a fair share of revenue because you own the content, you own everything over there. And the only way to actually make it happen is by coming together, joining forces together, and being able to fight or combat against the duopoly hold in this market. Thank you.
I think you should buy your own car, not somebody else's car. That's the way I would put it. Thank you.